Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. Hopefully you were able to join us this morning for part one, but if not, that's okay, and welcome. My name is Kelly Toth. My normal job is as a Central District Office Air Manager, but today I'll be the moderator for this session, which includes information that I assure you we use in our permitting program every day. This afternoon's webinar, Introduction to Air Permitting and Reporting Part 2, is part of Ohio EPA's brand new 2020 Virtual Compliance Assistance Conference. The sessions for this conference are over the next 3-week period through October 8th. Included in today's chat feature, which you should be able to see on your screen there, is a link to our conference page where you can look at and register for any of the other sessions that you might be interested, including 2 sessions tomorrow that we'll remind you about later. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items to help you participate and get the most out of today's event. Jana, do you want to go to the next slide? All right, on this slide here, you will see a screenshot of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your computer screen in the upper right-hand corner. For this webinar, you are listening in using your computer speaker system. So if you're having any sound issues, please check your computer's audio settings. Please feel free to submit questions to today's presenter by typing them in the questions pane of the control panel, which also will be on your screen. You may send your questions in at any time during the presentation, and we'll collect them and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Or if it's a question that I or one of the other panelists can answer, we may directly respond to you during the presentation. If we do not have time to answer your question, we will reach out to you via email after the session. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the presentation slides are available in the handout section of your attendee interface. So don't worry if you miss something or have to take a call. Also, once the webinar is edited, you'll receive a link to the recording and a follow-up email along with a session survey. The session survey will also appear when the session is over, and we would appreciate if you could fill that out and let us know how we're doing, and if there's anything else that we can help you with to assist you. A certificate of attendance that I understand is also quite attractive will also be included in that email about a day after the session. All right, for those interested in CEUs, 1 hour of registered sanitarian and sanitarian training continuing education units have been pre-approved for this session. If you did not enter your RS or SIT number when registering for this session, please make sure you provide us with your number through the Q&A feature. Attendees seeking American Planning Association credit may do so through the APA's self-reporting option by logging into your My APA account and selecting the self-reported credits option. If you're seeking other CEUs, please check out our e-binder attached to today's webinar. Okay, now with all the logistics out of the way, I am very pleased to introduce to you your excellent presenter for this afternoon, Jana Gannon. Jana is a senior environmental specialist dealing with complex permitting and enforcement in our Northeast District Office. She has been with the agency for 20 years, all in air pollution, but prior to that worked as a compliance specialist for a hazardous waste treatment facility. Jana has a bachelor's in environmental biology from Ohio University and a master's in environmental health and safety management from the University of Findlay. Also joining us is our presenter from this morning, Tim Fischer, who will be helping with questions. Tim is the Air Program Manager for our Northeast District Office. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Jana Gannon. Please welcome Jana.
Thank you, Kelly, for that introduction. And thank you all for tuning in today for this exciting opportunity. I have presented at previous conferences, and those were in person, obviously. And we weren't able to reach nearly as many people as we can with this remote platform. So thank you to OCAP for setting this up and giving us all this great opportunity. Glad to see we have quite a few attendees today. So that's great. As Kelly said, my name is Jana Gannon, and I'm here to present the second part of Introduction to Air Permitting and Reporting. Just a little background on me, in addition to what Kelly said. As she said, I've worked in the air pollution field as a regulator for about 20 years. Before my transition to regulator, I did work for a small waste treatment company, and I handled their environmental and safety compliance issues, just like many of you. So I worked on both sides of regulatory compliance, which means I have sat where you are, and I've struggled with many of the same questions. So hopefully today we can answer some of those, or at least point you in the right direction for all the resources that our agency has to offer that I will tell you about in a little bit. So again, same slide from this morning. Here's our contact information for future reference. Most Ohio EPA employees are working remotely at this time, but we have access to both our voicemail and our email, so you can still reach out to us with questions, and we really would appreciate it if you did. So during the previous session, hopefully Tim taught you what equipment at your facility needs an air permit, how to fill out the application, and which construction activities can take place before the permit is actually issued, which we have a rule that is a great resource for that too in our Ohio Administrative Code. So if you have questions on that, you can go directly to that rule and look that up, because I know that can be confusing for people. So I'm here to talk about what happens next. After the permit's been issued and the hard copy's in your hands, or more likely the electronic version is on your screen, how do you comply? So our objectives today are to understand the different sections of an air permit and why they're there, what's their purpose, to identify the various report types required by the permit and kind of understand why they're there, and also gain a knowledge about what permitting resources we have available for you. So let's start with a poll to get things rolling today. I'm going to read it to you, and then I believe it will appear on your screen, and you'll be able to select the appropriate box. So our first question is I'm just curious as to how you perceive our agency. So the question is, does a typical Ohio EPA air pollution compliance specialist complete more permits or site visits in a calendar year? So your options are going to be permits or site visits.
Great. As a heads up, it may take a few seconds for your polling question to pop up, depending on your device, so please be patient. But once you see the question pop up, you should be able to click on your response, and we'll give everyone a minute or so to respond. So we've got a lot of voting coming in. We're getting close to about 70%. So I'd say we'll give it another 15 seconds and then we'll shut it down. Okay, great. Good responses. Voting is now closed.
Okay. All right, thank you, Kelly. So I see from the results that 65% of you responded with permits and 35% said site visits. So I guess that was surprising to me. I thought more would say permitting, because that is actually what we spend quite a bit of our time doing. I kind of cheated on this one because I don't have an actual statistic to provide to you, but in general, I can tell you that the typical permit writer spends about 75% of their day or year. And to put that in other terms, you can picture 195 out of 260 work days sitting at our computers developing permits. And one caveat to that is that if you work with a local agency or district office that splits out permit writing and site visit work, then they do that for efficiency purposes for their office, so your answer will be a little different there. But in general, most of our staff do both permit writing and inspections, and so we do spend a lot of time writing the permits. So I wanted to talk about that because I wanted to tell you why we spend so much time writing permits. I mean, obviously it's because we have the workload there, but it's also because it's so critical that we get the permit right. The rest of the year we are spending interpreting that permit. So we want to make sure we have a good document for you and for the agency. So to talk a little bit more about what we do and don't do as air pollution inspectors, as I said, and Tim mentioned this morning, we spend a lot of time writing permits. And part of that is having a pre-meeting with you if you request it. If you have a large project coming up or you have questions, we encourage you to set up a meeting ahead of time so we can iron out any details before you submit your application. make your process go a little smoother for you. We do application review and entry. So if you don't submit electronically, we will enter the application hard copy for small sources. And then we review the application for completeness, and that's just the time when we really ask all of our questions for making sure that we have all the details correct. And then the largest part of our time is spent drafting the terms. So we want to make sure we have all the applicable rules and regulations in place. So we'll look those up and we'll research similar permits. But there's also a terms and conditions library that any of you can access. It's on our webpage, the Ohio EPA webpage. And that's where we get a lot of our standard terms from also. And then we revise the permits as necessary after you have a chance to look at them and our permit reviewer has a chance to look at them. So that you can see how that can be kind of a lengthy part of the process. But once we have that permit in place, we're using that document for the rest of our job. So when we do our site visits and our inspections, we're taking that document with us to make sure we understand what rules you have to comply with. Most of our inspections are Title V. We have a commitment to the US EPA to inspect Title V sources every 2 years and FEPTIO or synthetic minor sources every 5 years. If you're a minor source, we have recently started performing more inspections of those, but we don't inspect them on any set frequency. So if you see us, it could be in response to a complaint investigation or just to help you talk through some of your application concerns. We also use the permit in our stack test observations that we do. We want to make sure that we have the accurate testing period listed in the permit, how frequent you are to do the stack tests, and what methods you're to comply with if you're required to do a stack test at all. Again, if you're a small source, you might not have to do those. We do complaint investigations and we'll take a look at the permit to see if you are complying with all the requirements of the permit, if you are operating the emission unit properly and you're minimizing emissions and you're using your control device as you should be. Technical assistance, that's a big part of our job and one that we, most of us really enjoy. That's why, I think it's an honor to get to do this compliance assistance conference and reach so many people all at once. So, but if you have questions when you, I'd say go back to the office, but, going forward, feel free to email or reach out to us at any time. Report review is another thing we do. So your reports should all be listed in your permit. And then we take the time after you submit them to go over them for completeness and to see if any issues have arisen. So those are things that we do. Some things we don't do that people frequently have questions on are zoning approvals. We refer those to the local zoning board if applicable. Refrigerant reclamation for air conditioners. We send those to US EPA. Worker safety and indoor air quality. We are concerned about your workers, but unfortunately we don't have the regulatory authority over them. So any indoor air issues we typically send to OSHA if it's a safety concern or your local health department. And finally, noise complaints. We frequently get those too, but we just don't have the regulatory authority to handle those. So we might pass them on to the local zoning board. Okay. So your permit has been issued. Now what? So hopefully you were involved during the drafting of your permit, or at least had a chance to look it over before issuance. So you are kind of familiar with it. You should also reread it once it's been issued so you can make sure you've caught everything and mark down any important dates and deadlines. Now's a good time to set up your record keeping if you haven't already done it. You want to make it as simple as possible and train your employees on what part they play in the record keeping. And I'm going to go over record keeping separately later, so we'll get into more detail on that. Submitting reports in a timely manner, that's important. So now's the time to mark your calendar to make sure your reports are submitted before the due date, preferably, so there's not any concern with mail delays or electronic failures. So know what's happening at your facility. This is a big one. A lot of times your staff will notice that there's something going on with a control device or an emission unit, and they'll tell a plant manager or a maintenance supervisor, but they forget to tell the EHS people sometimes. So then that can lead to compliance issues down the road. So just make sure they know who you are and how to get a hold of you. And foster a good relationship with your neighbors. So it's good to be open with your neighbors, because we do get quite a few complaints that we respond to. So if they know who you are and what you do, then they'll be less likely to contact us. They'll work with you instead to come to a resolution over any issues they might have. So in case you haven't seen one of our permits, this is the general structure of the permit. It's the basic format of every permit we've issued in the past decade. So each title is kind of self-explanatory. I'm going to go over each one in more detail next. At a minimum, your permit's going to be about 20 pages long, since there's so much standard language, and each emission unit usually has about 5 pages itself also. So it could be a lengthy document. So some people are surprised by that, but it's because we have to fit so much into it. So let's start with the cover pages. Just like in any document, the cover pages summarize the key points of the permit, such as your permit type, general contact information for our agency, and it also provides the dates of the permit, the date of issuance, the date it's effective, and the date it expires. So make sure you're marking that on your calendar, as I said. Cover pages also contain a letter, and that goes over some of this useful information on the slide. So it provides, and not everybody reads this, so I want to make sure that you're aware that there is some good stuff in there that might help you over the course of the year. So it provides details on how to appeal the permit to ERAC within 30 days of issuance. So what this means is ERAC is our Environmental Review Appeals Commission. There is a $70 filing fee to appeal a permit, and it's not very common. In the past 20 years, I've seen maybe 2 permits appealed by outside parties, and they always make it clear ahead of time that they're going to be appealing the permit. So, but just to let you know, that's an option with our permits. Provides information on how to contact OCAP or the Ohio Air Quality Development Authority, because you can get information with them on pollution prevention or energy conservation, and also some cost savings information for financing and tax exemption for your sources. You also can find our online survey link on the cover pages, and that's where you're going to provide your permitting experience feedback. So let us know how we can improve our process, or maybe just continue to give you great service, which we'd love to hear too. Our permits are available electronically. Now with our remote work status, if you have a permit issued recently, then you would have received it electronically. But if you need one before then, you can always contact your office or go on our website under issued permits. And there's also an emergency spill hotline number if you were to happen to have a large spill at your facility. Getting into the standard terms, these are the generic terms that cover all the language that isn't in the emission unit terms. They look the same at every permit, except if they look slightly different if you're Title V versus non-Title V, just because of different rules that apply. But I'm going to go over some of the non-Title V standard terms today. So the authorization page is in your standard terms. Excuse me. This is a separate page signed by the director that gives you your authorization to install and operate the sources listed in your permit. So I think that's the important part there, is that it's not a universal authorization for all the units at your facility. It's only for those specified in your permit. And you comply until it's revoked, terminated, or transferred. So your permits do expire. Non-Title V's expire every 10 years. FEPTIOs expire and Title V expire every 5 years. So you need to know when your permit's expiring and submit a renewal application prior to the date of expiration. So for non-Title V's, we send out a reminder 6 months prior to that date. So go ahead and submit your complete application before the deadline. If you don't receive a reminder, you still need to submit a complete application. And if it is complete, this is important to note that you can continue to operate after expiration. So if you have a complete application, you're good to keep operating, even if we're slow to get the permit renewed for you right away. However, if it's not submitted or not complete, you're subject, to further discussion with our agency. So make sure you apply early. And then for permit expiration, normally your permit will expire upon the date listed in the cover pages. However, PTIOs expire 18 months after issuance if you haven't started construction or entered into a contract to start construction. So we've seen this once in a while where a company will get a PTIO and then they lose financing or a pandemic hits and causes construction delays. So you can extend your expiration date up to 12 months with cause. Just remember to apply. All right. What do you do if you have an emission unit that you want to shut down during the permit term? When shut down means that it's physically removed from service or altered in a way it can no longer operate. So an example would be if you removed your source from the power supply so that one of your workers can't come over and just turn it back on. So if you have that happen, you can submit a certification to us, including the date, and maintain records that were generated while it was operating for 5 years. And then you submit any necessary reporting that would have been necessary during the time that it operated. So you can do this certification electronically via e-business. You can let us know in the PER, or you can submit a separate letter. If you have an ownership transfer during the term of your permit, you can let us know. Well, you need to let us know. The new owner would submit the form within 30 days of transfer. And again, that can be done electronically via Air Services. There's a button on there called Owner Contact Change that you can hit and submit it. If not, you can just let us know via a letter signed by your responsible official. And if you want your name changed on your permit, then you can submit an application for that. Otherwise, we'll just change the name at renewal and you don't need to submit a modification. Okay, moving on to the facility-wide terms. As the name states, these are terms that apply to the entire facility. And they include, it's important to note, they include both permit exempt and de minimis units. Examples of these terms that you might see, and this is where we start getting into sections of the permit that might say none. So these are sections that would not apply to everyone, but they might apply to you. So I'm just going to talk about some examples of what you might see. Synthetic minor restrictions that limit your facility-wide emissions. So possibly your VOC and HAP usage you might see in facility-wide. State rules that include work practices, records, or reporting for the whole facility. So an example I've seen is one of our state rules, 2125, which is for reinforced plastic composites manufacturing facilities. They might have requirements for cleaning and storage operations that would not apply to a specific emission unit, but could apply to a de minimis or exempt unit. So we put that in the facility-wide section. We put federal rules in this section, and these might be federal rules that are also going to be included in your EU terms. And so we put them in this section so we can provide you more information on how to access those federal rules. And for federal rules, think MACT or NSPS rules. So we'll share links to the US EPA website here. There's also some federal rules that aren't delegated Those are the area source max or GACs. We just let you know that you're subject to them, but US EPA is the only one with authority to enforce upon them, so we just provide it for informational purposes. And you might also see reporting instructions here just to save space. If you only have one emission unit, typically we just put the reporting information in your emission unit terms, but if it's a large facility, we might put them up here. So, that's what you'd see in this section. Now let's get to the meat and potatoes of the permit, as you might say, the emission unit terms. We spend most of our time as permit writers on this section, getting back to that first polling question. You can call us one of the 195 days of the year in which we're working on permits, and we'll be staring at this section. So the terms are designed to have the most important information first. So we're going to list out your applicable rules and emission limits. And then everything else in the permit is supporting information to guarantee your compliance. You might see the emission unit terms can be grouped if you have similar units with similar rules and regulations. So think if you have a bunch of spray booths at your facility, or shot blasts, or engines, or generators, or tanks. Those are all types of emission units that we could group together, and we would just list them at the top, and then all the terms would be the same. And, they might, and I should say, they might have different emission limitations, but we would spell that out, but they would have the same rules. So it just makes the permit a little more concise and readable. Okay, so speaking of that meat and potatoes, this is what it looks like. It's a table at the beginning of this section, and it's going to list out each applicable rule that applies on the left, and then on the right is what that rule is saying that you must comply with. So we take these limits from state or federal rules. So any rule, air pollution rule that applies to your source, we have to list here. If a rule appears to apply, but you're exempt from it, we might list it still and state that you're exempt and why you're exempt. So, for example, we have things called Appendix A areas in the state, which is a list of counties in Ohio where certain particulate emission rules apply. So the rule could apply based on your source type and the fact that you emit particulates, but you might not have any requirements within the rule because the county was deemed to have no need for regulation. So you might see that. There's also an additional terms and conditions section below the table, and that is where we put explanations for the rules. So if we're getting too wordy up in the table, sometimes we'll just say see section B2A below, and you look down below and you'll see the requirements. And also, if there's multiple requirements that need to be listed, we might just put them down there, but they're always going to reference back to the emissions limit table, and so you'll know what rule that section's coming from. Next is the operational restrictions section. So this section is typically only needed if restrictions are necessary to avoid a rule, such as if you have a synthetic miner permit or if a control device is being used. Again, this section may also state none, so you might not have any operational restrictions if you're not a synthetic miner, if you're not using a control device. But if you do have restrictions, some examples are production, hours, use, and like I said, use of the control equipment. So that's what an example would be. Here's some terms that we put into the permit. The dust collector shall be operated whenever this EU is in operation. The dust collection system shall be expeditiously repaired if it breaks. And also for the limitations, we'll say things like the maximum daily operating hours shall not exceed, and then we fill in the blank. So that's just a little example of what the restrictions might look like. So now let's get into, once you know what the rules are in your emission limit section, how can we make it easier for your company to demonstrate compliance? So we have set up the monitoring and record keeping section as a way for you to show that you are maintaining your emissions below the given thresholds. So they're designed to assure proper operation of the emission unit and the control equipment, ongoing compliance with rules, limits, and operational restrictions in the permit. So they're going to refer back to all of the emission limits and that we set up in that table that I talked about. They are per unit or facility-wide. So you might see in your facility-wide section that I mentioned, you might see some record keeping that applies to the whole facility. And this section may be negotiable at the application stage. So you may even propose terms and conditions for this section. Like I said before, there's templates available on our webpage under the terms and conditions library. You can look in there and see what you think might apply. Some examples of monitoring that you might see in your permit are control device operating parameters. So these are parameters that are recommended typically by the manufacturer of the device. If you have a baghouse, it's typically pressure drop. If it's a scrubber, it's usually water flow rate. If it's an oxidizer, it's going to be temperature measurements. So like I said, you'll see control device operating parameters or actual measurements sometimes with continuous monitors. And that could be for specific pollutants or opacity. The goal for both is to demonstrate that the emissions unit and any associated control devices are doing their job to minimize emissions. So here's a picture for you. This is an example of monitoring and what could go wrong. So this demonstrates why it's important to read and understand your permit terms. Not just you, but the staff that's actually operating the equipment and taking the readings. Here we see a manometer or a pressure drop gauge on a baghouse. And it might be a little hard to read, but the range the baghouse is permitted to stay within is at the bottom, but the actual reading shows that the unit is operating above that range. So this indicates a problem with the control device, which could lead to excess emissions. So look at each control device with your staff and show them how to take the readings and what they mean. You can write the control device ranges from the permit directly on the record keeping form, and then state also who the operator should notify if out of range. So this is just a little example on real world application of the monitoring. Okay, let's switch things up with another poll. I've talked for a while now, and it's time to get you guys engaged. This one's pretty specific to industries with particulate emissions, but I think it's a good example of the types of questions that we get. So I'm just going to throw it out there. So the question is, and I know it'll take a minute to pop up on your screens, but I'll go ahead and read it. Does Ohio EPA require facility personnel to be certified in US EPA Method 9 to perform standard daily visible emissions checks? And your options are yes, no, or sometimes.
Okay, great. Your poll should be showing up any second now. As soon as you see that question, feel free to answer it. If you don't know the answer, just guess. I'm just trying to get a feel for what people want. We'll give it about a minute. Yeah, votes are coming in fast. That's great. We're about 70%. Say we'll give it maybe 15 more seconds and then we'll shut it down. Okay, great. Poll is now closed.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. So it looks like we had the response of no. 49% of you said no, you don't need to be certified. 23% said yes, and 27% said sometimes. So I don't like to make my polling questions too obvious. So it probably could be sometimes depending on how the permit's worded, but I'm going to go with no, just to make things simple. So the majority of you got it right. Congratulations. So what this question was about is if we are requiring you to do method 9 readings, then we'll typically specifically state that in your permit, and we're not going to call it a daily check. I mean, sometimes we call them weekly checks if you're lucky enough to have that option, but we will tell you when you need to do method 9 readings, and that's for a very limited set of source categories typically required by a federal rule. So I just wanted to bring that question up because we do get that question quite a bit, and I wanted to clear it up for you that these are just visual checks. If your permit says to do a daily check, it's just a visual check of the stack, and it's for sources that have particular emissions, and they aren't inherently clean, meaning that they're not natural gas burning sources, but they aren't large enough to have opacity monitors. So they don't require your staff to be certified in reading opacity, just familiar enough with the process to identify abnormal operation. So let's go to our next slide. So speaking of abnormal operation, I would hope that this company would note this as such in their records. If you do have a VE check requirement in your permit, the purpose is to identify problems with the control device or the emission unit early so it can be fixed quickly. When doing the checks, we recommend you do something similar to a method 9, so kind of stand in the same place every day with the same background. And you want to try to get a background with the best contrast that you can. You know, this one's a little tricky because there's not a good background. Maybe the pipe could be a contrasting color, but otherwise, and don't look into the sun, you know, as you know, if you've been certified in method 9. So that's just a little question that we frequently get. So moving on to record keeping. This is another big part of the permit. This is how your company keeps track of compliance. So set it up as soon as you get a copy of your permit. And incorporate all the requirements of the permit in your forms, and they can be electronic or hard copy. We don't specify that. I will say that it is nice when companies have electronic forms now because we've been doing some virtual site visits and it makes it easier to submit that information, but it's not a requirement. So make your record keeping easy and fail safe so you're not doing excessive paperwork, which makes it challenging for everybody. Write the allowable ranges and contact information on the log. And if you have continuous monitors and recorders, that kind of helps cut back on staff time and human error for recording things, but we realize that's an investment and might not make sense for a small source. So do the best you can with your logs that you create. Train your staff that are taking the readings, so make sure they understand when they see something out of range, what are they supposed to do about it? So hopefully it would be to tell you and you could make some adjustments. Do what makes sense for your company. The records are required to be kept for at least 5 years. And you can always contact our agency or OCAP if you need help with records creation. We can offer suggestions or provide examples. We don't typically give you a form to keep your records on because we want you to have a little flexibility on how those look, but we can definitely make suggestions if you would like. Okay, so you've created all these records. Now what do you do with them? So we have an answer for you, and we name them reports. So look at them as an opportunity to review all those records you created that we know you worked so hard on them, and periodically submit your findings to us. So there are essentially 3 major categories of reports: compliance reports, immediate reports, and fee reports. So they are a method, like I said, of notifying us of whether or not you're meeting your permit requirements. All companies submit these in some form or another. Other reports that you could submit are just transfers of data, such as stack test results, or maybe a MAC'd initial notification report. So it's just letting us know what your data or results showed. Immediate notifications are submitted as needed, and you should submit them, as the name implies, as soon as you become aware of a situation, such as an equipment malfunction or an emissions release. Scheduled maintenance is a special situation that doesn't apply to everyone, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then finally, fee reports. These are just reports of your actual emissions for the calendar year, and as the name implies, an invoice will be assessed later based on those amounts. So we'll talk about all these in a little in detail next. Okay, so reporting, what and where. Report frequency is determined in your permit terms, either in the standard terms or the emission unit specific terms. So check your permits to determine when you need to submit your reports. The frequency is typically determined by our rules, either state or federal, or the standard terms from our library. So you could be submitting annual, semi-annual, quarterly, after an event, etc. Okay, some of the most common reports that that you will submit and we review are permit evaluation reports, or PERs, quarterly deviation reports, malfunction reports, and fee reports. Let's do a poll to see how familiar you are all with the types of reports. Since this is the afternoon session and you may be growing weary of listening to regulatory talk, I tried to make it an easy one. So the question is, have you submitted any of the following types of reports to Ohio EPA? You can select PER, quarterly deviation report, malfunction report, fee report, or none of the above.
Okay, great. You should be seeing that up there. It looks like you can, if you've selected all, or you submitted all those reports, you can select as many as you want or as few as you want. And give it about a minute. Okay, lots of people selecting a lot of them. That's great. We're about 78% of the way there, so give it another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll close it out. Great, the polling is now closed.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kelly, again for handling that. Looking at the results of the poll, and it looks like we have quite a variety of answers. I'm going to go with the most common answer was permanent evaluation report, which is 47% of you, and that's what I would expect because that is for non-Title V sources or minor sources. They all have to submit those annually. And then 44% said quarterly deviation reports, 18% said malfunction report, which again is to be expected. Not many people submit malfunction reports. 44% do fee reports. I kind of thought that would be higher. And 37% none of the above. So maybe some of you are new to this and don't need to submit any, which is great. So we're going to try to teach you a little bit more about them. Starting with the permit evaluation report. So this was developed in 2008 when our permitting system switched from separate installation and operation permits to one PTIO. And the goal was to simplify reporting for small companies. Since all deviation reports used to be quarterly, now they are annually. So that's a good thing for companies. All non-Title V and FEPDO sources are required to submit these if you have a permit that's been issued since 2008. And I would hope that your permit has been issued since 2008, since that was 12 years ago. If not, you might want to contact our agency and see about getting a newer permit. You issued a PTIO, and like I said, it replaces most quarterly reports. But it does not replace rule-based reporting or synthetic minor reporting relating to the avoidance of a federal requirement, like avoiding Title V, MACT, or PSD. So you can't get out of that. For the PER, the beauty of PERs is that Ohio EPA mails out forms and reminders for them prior to their due date. So again, our goal was to simplify compliance so you're not guessing anymore about what information to submit. We have a form that helps you with that. So we mail out a reminder for non-Title V facilities. And again, it's only for units that have been issued a PTIO. This is your opportunity to make corrections to your file. So you can do that in your PER. Your due date is selected by you during the application process. It's one of 4 days during the year. And you can correlate that date with other reporting deadlines if that's easier for you, or a time of year when you're not as busy. And there is a process to change that date if you desperately wanted to, but you may need to modify the permit or send us a letter letting us know that you would like that date changed, and we can issue a director's letter to modify that for you. Next, let's look at the actual PER. So this is page 1 of that report. The basic information at the top is pre-populated based on what information we have in our file on you. But that's the top part is where you compare our records to what's actually happening at your facility. And you fill in the blanks at the bottom. So this is your chance to notify us of updates we need to make to your file. Common changes we see are ownership changes and contact information changes. So if there's a new phone number, or address, or an email, this is where you put that in, and then we will make those changes to your file. This is page 2. The emission unit table is pre-populated by our system. It's generated from the issued permits that you have. So if your emission unit didn't obtain a PTIO during the time period covered by the PER, it won't be included. There's a box down there called the additional information and corrections. That's to identify corrections and additional information required by the PER. You can tell us anything from the past year that doesn't fit in the other boxes. So you can list your shutdown emission units, or tell us if an emission unit wasn't installed or operated. And this is also where the air toxics negative declaration will be noted. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, I apologize, but it is something that we do put in quite a few of our permits that have air toxics modeling requirements in our permits. So we ask that companies let us know every year if they have changed any of their coatings and if any new air toxics are being emitted, so that we would need to let us know if we need to look at the permit again. So again, it only applies to certain sources, but that's where you would put that information in this section. Underneath is the responsibility language, which lets you know that the form is required by the director. So please be accurate and timely. And it also provides assistance information at the bottom, which, we try to promote. Anytime you have questions, contact your local agency or district office or OCAP. Page 3 is the detailed emission unit form. So you're going to complete this form for each unit issued a PTIO. The fields in brackets are pre-populated, and then there's questions at the bottom where you're answering yes or no. So if there's a blank, you need to fill it in. So if your permit was recently issued and the install date wasn't provided to your agency already, now's your chance to update our records. Enter those dates here in these boxes. Then the bottom has the check boxes you need to mark to complete the report. So let's look at this blue arrow section on the next page. It's important to understand because this is where you're stating whether or not you had deviations from your permit. So you're looking at, essentially your permit is split into two questions, A and B. So the first part is operational restrictions or emission limitations. And the second part is the monitoring, record keeping, or reporting requirements. So have you had any deviations or exceedances during the past year for either one of those? You would check yes or no. If you do check yes, then you need to provide us with more information. You'll have to attach a separate page that states the dates, the duration, the probable cause, the corrective action information, et cetera, on a separate page. If you have additional reporting requirements in your permit that aren't listed above, that's what section D is about. So you're going to check yes, and you're going to put that information in the additional information and corrections section. So like I mentioned before, you have your air toxics declaration information, you have your VE, visible emission or filter deviation language. So you want to go back to page 2 and fill that out. If you're required to, you might not have that requirement. And finally, your responsible official doesn't need to sign the PER like they had to do with the quarterly deviation report. So you're ready to send it in. You can send it in a little faster than before. Quarterly reports. So all old permits and all synthetic minors and Title V's had to send these in. Have to send these in, I should say. These are reporting your quarterly deviations of your visible emissions observations, your emission limits, production limits, your control device parameters, whatever is spelled out in your permit. If you do have a deviation, you always need to tell us the cause and what you did to correct it and prevent it from happening in the future. So if you're a FEPTIO or a Title V, you do have to submit quarterly reports still. And this is important, this goes back to what I was saying about the aerotoxics negative declaration. There is also something called a negative declaration report for quarterly reports. So that just means that even if you didn't have any deviations, you still need to submit a report stating that you had none. So here's our CAN language for that. It's in our standard terms conditions. So there's no escape from quarterly reporting if it's required. You always have to send that in. Let's talk about malfunctions. Hopefully you'll never have to deal with these reports, but if you do, I think you need to be aware of what they require. So a malfunction is a breakdown of a source or control equipment, such as your fabric filter, your incinerator, your carbon absorber, whatever, but it results in a violation. And that's the important part, is determining whether or not a violation has occurred from this breakdown. So you can leave that up to your district office or local agency to decide. You don't have to make that call, but you are responsible for notifying us. So use the better safe than sorry route and just let us know if you have an issue that you think could be a problem. It's better to apologize for over-reporting than not reporting at all. Scheduled, unscheduled maintenance should be performed to avoid a malfunction. And scheduled maintenance, I said that I'd talk about that a little bit. That means you give at least 2 weeks prior notice to any maintenance that you're performing. That makes it scheduled maintenance. So you have to notify our agency that it's occurring and give us 2 weeks notice. Otherwise, it's considered a malfunction. So remember that shutting down your air pollution control equipment for maintenance means shutting down the source. Otherwise, you need a scheduled maintenance authorization request, or it's considered a malfunction. So if you do have a malfunction, you just need to report and correct the malfunction. Here's an example of a possible malfunction. You can see the opacity in this picture appears to be a problem with their particulate control device. The point here is that if you can see that dust, then your neighbor and everyone driving by can see it too. So that means we're going to get calls on it with questions. So it's best to let us know as soon as possible about any issues so we can address the public's concerns. So how to report a malfunction. This is the rule site for malfunctions. You have to notify our agency immediately. This can be by email or by phone, and immediately is not defined in our rules, but just do it as soon as possible so you don't forget and you don't want to have a bigger issue later. A written report may be required within 2 weeks if your event lasts longer than 72 hours. And typically the malfunctions we see don't last that long, but if they do, you're going to have some more specific reporting requirements. This is what you want to include in your malfunction report. So this is for both immediate notifications and the 72-hour malfunctions. You're going to provide the identification and location of the source, the duration of the breakdown, the quantity of the release, and a statement including why shutdown of the emission unit was not possible. You need to justify that the breakdown time was reasonable. So what that means is you're looking at what took so long to fix the issue. Is it due to delivery dates of your equipment to fix it? You didn't have replacement parts. The equipment wasn't available. You know, if any of those reasons, just let us know. Identify any interim control measures used. So if you're able to bring in a temporary flare or a temporary incinerator, if you suspect that's going to take a while to fix, then let us know that. And the PM and MA plan, which is the preventive maintenance and malfunction abatement plan, was that implemented? And that's only if applicable. It may be requested for sources that have excessive or unduly prolonged malfunctions. So compliance reports in general, I'm just going to kind of skip through this and just to conserve time. So they're typically based on our federal rules or our state rules, and they determine the frequency of report submittal. And again, make sure for compliance reports that you are reviewing all your records and information to make sure you're giving us an accurate view of your compliance status. So check to see if you've received an NOV during the reporting period. And if so, make sure you're noting those deviations in your reports. Review all your quarterly reports before you submit an annual report. So you might not need to include all the information from the quarterly report, but you should at least reference that you had a quarterly deviation in your annual report. You don't have to provide the same level of detail. And satisfy the permit requirements. Review those requirements upon new permit issuance and renewal. So each time a renewal is issued, make sure that there's no new reports that need to be submitted, and make sure you update your timeframes appropriately in your forms and letters. I think Tim kind of covered some of the fee emission report information earlier today. Essentially, you know, if you have a non-Title V, you have to submit those every 2 years. They're called the blue cards. Synthetic miners, you have to submit annually, and also Title V, submit these annually. And your actual emissions determine the fee. We mail them out in February. They're due April 15th of every year for the annual reports. And you are invoiced later by your agency. You don't send in any cash or checks at the time that you're sending in your reports. For blue cards, you're including your entire facility's emissions of these pollutants in tons, and your fees are based upon how much you emit. We do have an answer place ID and some additional guidance that is provided in links here, so you can check those out later if you have more questions. I mean, typically the more emissions you have, the more expensive the fee. So that's good to look at. Title V and synthetic minor fees. These we're looking at, they pay by the ton, so you're looking at how much you're emitting, and that's what we're charging you for. There you submit them. Title V and synthetic minor, the important thing to note here is that you have to submit these via e-business and air services, so they have to be submitted electronically. There are 5 billable pollutants, and one thing we get a question on is carbon monoxide. That is reportable in the reports, but it's not billable, so it's just information that we're gathering. Getting back to the sections of the permit, this is the testing requirements section. It includes all the methods for determining compliance with the emission limits and operational restrictions. So some examples you might see in this section are stack testing methods, US EPA methods, or calculation methods. So it's basically if you have an emission limit in tons per month, we're telling you how to do that calculation. We might refer back to the monitoring and record keeping section, but it will be clearly spelled out in this section. And then the miscellaneous requirements section, last but not least, this is the last section of the permit. This is where we put relevant information that doesn't fit in the rest of the terms. Some examples that you might see is if you have a portable emission unit, we put the rule site in here and what language you have to comply with. If changes are made to federal rules, we might state that the permit doesn't need to be modified, that you just need to make sure you comply with the modified federal rule. Or this section could just say none, and it frequently does in our permits. So a lot of times we just use this for the portable language, and that's about it. All right, so finally today I wanted to give you some additional tips and resources, as I promised at the beginning of the presentation. This is how you're going to gain access to our frequently asked questions section. So this used to be known as the answer place, and so I still call it that because right now it's kind of just called find resources on our website, and I'll show you how to get to that in a second here. But this is an opportunity, so if you have a compliance question that comes up after agency hours, or if we're on a holiday, or we're not available, you can try to go to the Find Resources page on our website to type in a question and get your question answered. So you can search our database on the next page I'll show you, and then also you can sign up for an account for this Find Resources page, and you can get updates on any questions that you've submitted or questions that you have an interest in. So if we change our guidance, you'll be notified. So where is it? This is our website, in case you haven't seen it before. One of the options at the top is do business. So you scroll down under Customer Support Center, it says Find Resources, FAQ, Publications, and Training. So you click on that button. And this is what your screen's gonna look like. If you know the specific ID, you type it in here and hit search, and you can find all kinds of answers to your questions. You can always click on Find Resources to be taken back to your search screen. And I typically just use the all resources to make sure I'm doing the most comprehensive search. So here's some common answer place IDs that you might want to take a look at a little bit later. These have all been updated in 2019, but these, a lot of questions we get relate back to these. So how do I activate an e-business center service account? We have an ID for that. What if I'm having a problem with air services and I have some suggestions for improving it? You can click on that link. how to submit non-Title V permit applications and reporting requirements. We have a link to that. And then we have a bunch of air services training videos. I think there's about 24 available that you can go in and look at, and they have information on accessing your account, to facility profile information, to application guidance. So look around at those when you get a chance, and hopefully they can provide some good information. Our central office did a nice job compiling those. And here's some helpful websites that you might look at when you get back to work. Our air services info website and our permit info website. And don't be afraid to ask your DULA representative, your district office or local air agency. That's why we're here. Okay, so these are the key takeaways from the last hour we've spent together. I want to reiterate this, that our goal is compliance, not enforcement. So please, please, please ask as many questions as you want. Develop record-keeping forms that mirror your terms. And if you need help with that, again, see the first one, ask us for help. Understand what types of reports are required and record the due dates on your calendar. So do that ahead of time so there's not a compliance issue. Know your operations, be familiar with who's in charge of keeping your records, and let them make sure they're aware of who you are so you can be informed of any issues. And finally, don't be afraid of Answer Place or your Ohio EPA representative. We're here to help. So that's why we did this presentation today. So that's all I have. Thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Jana. That was really, really great information. So right now it is a few minutes after 3, and we're going to go ahead and I think take some time for some questions. So if you're still with us, which is fantastic, please stick around for that. Just a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. We may not get through it this afternoon, but we will get back to you via email after the presentation if you don't get an answer here. And Tim, feel free to participate also, and we will get started. All right. So to whichever of you wants to take this first question, will my company be assigned a permit writer at Ohio EPA that I could ask specific questions of?
I can answer that question. Yeah, typically we have assignments for each facility that we write permits for. And so if you're a new facility and you don't have that permitting contact information yet, you'll get that. We send a letter out with each application we receive notifying you of who to contact with questions. But if you don't know, you can go to our website, and there is a general contact button that you can just ask any district office or local air agency about your facility, and they can look up who you should specifically contact.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Let's see. How about, we got a question about the scheduled maintenance and malfunctions. And I can answer this one, but because it's simple, it basically, does it apply to all operations or just Title V's? And the malfunction rule is applicable to all operations that have air pollution control equipment. And you can check out the rule specifically for that. Okay. Tim, I'm going to send this one to you because you answered it for one person, and I think it'd be a good question for everybody, which is, what is the difference between a deviation and a malfunction?
So a deviation that you mark in your deviation reports or your PERs or things like that are typically deviations from a permit requirement, which could be from parametric monitoring for a control device, like a pressure drop range that you're supposed to stay in, but it goes outside that range, that's a deviation. Or if an employee that's supposed to do those VE checks that Jana talked about fails to do so for a couple of days, that's a deviation from your permit. Emissions exceedances could also be deviations. So kind of everything encompasses, in that word deviation from your permit terms. What was the other word? I'm sorry, Kelly.
Malfunction?
Malfunction. Thank you. I'm sorry. Whereas a malfunction would be more of an emission limit. It has to exceed an emission limit. So it's the breakdown or failure of a control device or the emissions unit in such a way that the emissions cause an exceedance of the actual emission limit.
Okay, great. All right. Next question. We have a company who is going through a name change in the near future. The owner and everything else will be the same. But is this something that should be addressed specifically now, or should it wait until their next renewal permit?
I think I can answer that one. So they said they just have a name change. If that's the case, then we can handle that at the permit renewal, unless the company has a preference where they really want their name changed on their permit, and they can submit a modification application.
That's good. All right. That's a very similar one. Okay. If my permit has federally enforceable limitations, does that mean that USEPA will inspect my company?
That's not typically what that means. Federally enforceable limitations just mean that your permit had to go draft and be commented on by US EPA, and the public has the opportunity also. So there's a 30-day comment period for any federally enforceable limitations. The US EPA only inspects facilities on a frequency that they determine. We don't. They don't have a frequency that they have to present to us for inspections.
Okay, great. And I'll make this the last question, and I think I know the answer to it also, but have the emission fee invoices been sent out for this year? So that is a great question. And I will say that Ohio EPA is behind on a lot of things related to invoicing, just because of we're not working from the office and being COVID. So my understanding is that those fee invoices for everyone that submitted a fee report, whether you submitted it back in February through essentially all through August, that we have finally been able to process most of those, and that the invoices are starting to go out now. So if you may have received it already, or it will be coming out pretty soon. If you have air services, you can check that to see if it's there. If not, it probably has not been sent to your company just yet. And that is, I think they're hoping to get them out by the end of September. But with everything, just please be patient, and you do not owe us any money until you receive that invoice. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jana and Tim, and thanks to everybody for attending today's webinar. I also really want to recognize the entire staff of our OCAP Compliance Assistance Group for setting up the session. They trained all of us on how to do this, and they've been working behind the scenes to make the session go so smoothly. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact Tim or Jana, and you have their information there. Just final parting notes: once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we'd really appreciate it if you can complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording of today's webinar, a certificate of attendance, and another link to the survey if you do not get a chance to complete it now. On behalf of Ohio EPA and our presenters, I want to sincerely thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you at all the other virtual compliance assistance sessions, especially tomorrow's sessions. In the morning, we have Working Effectively with Ohio EPA. That should be excellent. And in the afternoon, we have Ohio EPA's response program, what to do and what to expect when you have a spill. So thanks so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you tomorrow.